Kalt ema frapo, ulte sola uniprote. Hello and welcome to the third grammar part of the Forest Neytiri video course. Today we will talk about another case ending, namely the indirect object. Let's jump right in. So what is ru? You can already think probably it is the indirect object. It's a case ending, as I said already. So remember, in the last grammar video we talked about L and T, which also were case endings. As said, it's the indirect object. It's also sometimes called the dative, so you will encounter both names. And it can often be translated as to someone or to something, if we take the verb literally. This doesn't always work, but it can give you a hint that you might need ru. This now sounds all very ominous. When do I now use it? We will look at tons of examples, so don't worry, this is just more a general overview. And the ru case ending is actually used in a wide variety of situations in Neytiri, even when in English we would not use something like this, but in English, for example, in some situations we would use a direct object, but then Neytiri it becomes an indirect object. Or we use ru to translate things that in English are handled completely differently. But we will look at all of this. In general, don't worry too much if you don't know always immediately which case ending to use, because often it is just a case of English and Neytiri using different structures to do the same thing. You will encounter situations where you're surprised by a verb using the ru case ending, and that is totally fine. This is just part of the learning process. Let's do a small repetition, case endings. As you remember, last time we talked about L and T. So we had the subject, which shows who is the one doing the verb, who is performing the action. And that was the L ending, and we had this beautiful table to show how you put the case ending onto a noun. And we had the direct object, so who is being verbed, who is affected by the action, who is being seen, followed, and so on. And that was the T ending. And there we had the stupidly complicated looking table, but remember that the T works almost always. So if in doubt, put a T on there, so a TI. This is what we learned so far. Now we get a third case ending, namely the ru ending. As I said, indirect object to whom or what? The ru ending. And now we again get quite a complicated table. But like with the T ending, there is again a trick to it. So first of all, if a word ends in a vowel, then we can either just put an R or a ru. So nga can become either ngaru or just ngar. If a word ends in a consonant, a double L or double R, so pseudo vowel, then we put a ur there. So mo'at would become mo'atur. Not mo'atru, that doesn't work, that's wrong. It can only be mo'atur there. There's one exception, namely if a noun ends with a diphthong, so the small apostrophe. In that case, it can be either ur or ru. So olo means clan, and olo ur or olo ru are both perfectly fine and can both be said that way. Then we again have the situation that for every single diphthong we have different rules. And again, like I said for the T, if you're already a bit more advanced and you want to learn really everything in detail, then save this table, learn it by heart. If not, don't worry at all. Ru is always fine. So you see eiru works, airu, euru, and auru. So if in doubt, use ru for diphthongs. Now, what do we use it for? And I already gave a bit more general advice. Let's look at it in a bit more detail. This is the kind of overview slide again, and we will see examples for all of these, don't worry. So as I said, it can be translated as to someone or something, but this can be quite abstract. Like, it might be that in the usual English translation, we actually do not say to someone, but then if you reconstruct the English sentence a bit, then you can kind of see that the ru is hidden in there. With transitive verbs, it then usually shows that someone receives something. So something is given to someone, shown to someone, promised to someone. So there we get this to as in the receiver of something. It is very often also used with intransitive verbs, where in English we would expect a direct object. This is not a general rule, by the way, just a tendency. Sometimes when we have a direct object in English, but the natvi verb is intransitive, then sometimes there is a solution with ru. It is very often used with C verbs. C verbs is a category of intransitive verbs, which we will look at in detail in a bit. And it is very good friends with the verb lu, and if you have watched my last vocab video, so chapter 2 vocab video, then you know lu means to be. And there are multiple different constructions with ru plus lu, which are really useful and which you will use a lot. And if in doubt, check the verb dictionary. As I said, it's totally natural to not be sure if a verb uses ru or not, because sometimes you just got to learn by heart of specific verbs, use specific case endings. So using the verb dictionary to check what case endings a verb uses is always a good idea and will make your life a lot easier. Let's start with ru in combination with lu. And as I said, and you very likely already know, lu is an intransitive verb and it means to be. Let's look at the first sentence. I have an ikran. Lu ikran weru. And here you see directly that the English sentence does not have to be in there. Literally, what we are saying is, there is an ikran. Lu ikran. So lu on its own, lu plus just a noun means there is and then the noun. So lu ikran, there is an ikran. And now we are noting weru, to me. So there is an ikran to me, which then means I have an ikran. And that is indeed the way to say that you have something in natvi. Because in natvi, there simply is no verb to have. You instead use this construction. Lu ikran, there is an ikran. Weru, to me. Another example of the same construction would be, you have a book. Ngaru lu book. To you, there is a book. So, you have a book. Another example of lu together with ru would be weru, so to me, tsau luftue. That is easy. So that's easy to me. I think that's easy. I find it easy. I love you is one of the sentences we get asked for very often. And that one also uses ru plus the lu. And what we're actually saying here is, you are beloved, nga yaune lu, to me, where. So why do we do that? Simply, there is no verb that means to love in natvi. There's only a noun, te yaun, but that one is really a noun, it means love, the concept of love, so we cannot use it to say I love you. And then there is the adjective yaune, beloved. So we really have to say you are beloved to me to express that I love you. This is just the way it works in natvi. There are other adjectives that can be used similarly. For example, lom. Lom nga lu means you are missed. And if I now say poru, lom nga lu, you are missed to him, then what I'm saying is he misses you. So there's also no verb for to miss in the sense. There is a verb for to miss, hoop, but that means to miss as in you are shooting on something and you are missing the target. This is not usually what you mean if you want to say I miss you. You don't want to say I tried to shoot at you but I missed. So better use this construction with lu and the ru case ending instead. The mother trusts the warrior. Again, to trust is not really a verb in natvi. So we have our adjective mal, trustworthy or trust-inspiring. So I can say lu tsamsiyu mal. The warrior is trustworthy. And then I note to whom is he trustworthy? To the mother. So satnokur. Lu tsamsiyu mal satnokur. The warrior is trustworthy to the mother. So in general, you see that there are a bunch of verbs that just don't have a natvi equivalent. Specifically to have, to love, to miss, to trust. So instead we use an adjective and say that something is in a certain way to me or to someone else, of course. And this way we can use ru in many different sentences in combination with lu to achieve these meanings. Let's look next at intransitive verbs. Just as a reminder, intransitive verbs can never use the LNT case endings because they cannot have a direct object. Some of them use ru instead. Let's look at some examples, and these examples might look a bit weird for you at the beginning. If you see something weird in that, then it's actually very good, because that means that you understand more than I taught so far. But let's just see, I will go through them rather quickly, and then afterwards we will look at what looks weird here. I like the flower. Sunu siulang weru. You know him. Ngaru po smon. Kiri prays to Ewa. Ewa ru aho kiri. This is important to me. Tsranten fe u weru. That surprises the mother. Tsakem satnokur loho. Maybe you think that some of these sentences are a bit weird, because why do we not just use L and T for these? Like, I like the flower. Why don't we just say, well, sunu siulangit? Of course, the obvious answer is because it's intransitive, but why is it intransitive? And now if you look at this sentence as well as probably the second one in a bit more detail, then you might see something else that is weird. Namely, in I like the flower, I am the subject. I'm the one liking something. But in the Natvi sentence, siulang is the subject. So siulang has no case ending, meaning it must be the subject. And oe, I, is actually the indirect object. So that doesn't line up with the English translation. The same for the second sentence, you know him. Here, you are the subject. You are the one knowing someone. But in ngaru po smon, po, so he is actually the subject because he doesn't have a case ending. And ngaru, so the nga, is the indirect object. So what is happening here? Let's look at these sentences again and look at the literal translation of the verbs, and that will very likely help you understand. So, I like the flower, sunu siulang weru. What it literally means is the flower is likable to me. So sunu does not mean to like. It means to be likable, to be pleasing. If I now say the sentence like this, then the flower suddenly is the subject, because the flower is the thing being likable. So it doesn't get the case ending, because sunu siulang, the flower is likable. Then we just add to whom the flower is likable, weru, to me. So we get the full sentence, sunu siulang weru, the flower is likable to me, I like the flower. Something very similar happens to the second sentence. Smon actually means to be known, not to know. So if I want to say that you know him, what I'm actually saying is he is known to you. So in this sentence, the he now is the subject. So po smon, he is known. To whom is he known? Ngaru, so to you. Again, this works very similarly to the first sentence. The next sentence that isn't really a problem. Kiri prays to Ewa. Ewa ru aho kiri. The next one, same. This is important to me. Tsranten fe u weru. So there we again have very clearly this is the subject because this is important. So fe u is the subject, doesn't get the case ending. Then to whom is it important? To me. So weru. And then lastly, we get that surprises the mother. Tsakem satnokur loho. By the way, there is no underline in tsakem because tsakem can be said either tsakem or tsakem. So it doesn't matter where you stress it there. The stress can be on both syllables. That's why there is no underline. And yeah, loho means to be surprising, not to surprise. So again, we are saying tsakem loho, the action is surprising, and then we have to add to whom is it surprising? To the mother, so the mother, the satnok, gets the ru ending. Those were a bunch of intransitive verbs that use ru. Of course there are more, but let's look at C verbs. And I think before we start to look at ru in combination with C verbs, we first should answer the question, what the hell are C verbs? And you're very likely familiar with them, at least to some extent. But if we look up C in the dictionary, then we see varied things like auxiliary verb. What is that? Auxiliary verb, postpositional non-bound verb do make. So I think this is even more confusing probably. So the dictionary doesn't really help us here. So what are C verbs? C verbs are verbs that are made from the helping verb see. You see them very often actually. Probably you have seen something like uvan si, to play, which is just uvan, a game, plus si. Or irayo si, which is just irayo, thanks, plus a si. So what the si does is it turns other words into verbs. It cannot be used on its own, so you will never see a si without any other word. The si always belongs together with the other word with which it builds the verb together. And usually those are based on a noun or an adjective. So for example, with uvan si, to play, it is based on uvan, which is a noun. And very important, we cannot make our own si verbs. So you cannot just put the si on any word to make it a verb. There's one exception, that is with names. So I can, for example, say tekre si, to pull a tekre, to do as tekre would do. This is very colloquial, so don't say this in a formal environment, but in colloquial language you can say that and can do this with names. But in other cases you cannot create your own si verbs. If they're in the dictionary, then you can use them, otherwise not. Let's look at some examples. I already said irayo si, to thank, from irayo, thanks, or a thank, the noun. I also already said kalt'e si, I think, to greet, from kalt'e, hello, an interjection. We also have, for example, laro si, to clean, and this one comes from laro, which is the adjective clean. Lau si, to make clear, from lau, clear. Uvan si, to play, from uvan, game. Kelku si, to live or dwell, from kelku, house or home. So now's the question. Why are these always intransitive? And maybe you remember last time I actually told you this when I talked about transitivity. I told you, hey, tip, all si verbs are intransitive. Why are they always intransitive? For that, we should again look at the literal translation. So here we have the si verbs together with how they sound or how they get translated in nice English. But let's look at the literal translation. Irayo si literally is to do a thank to someone or something. Kalt'e si is to do hello to someone. Laro si is to do clean to someone or something. So to do the concept clean, to do the adjective clean to something. Lau si then again to do clear, to do the adjective clear to something. Uvan si is to do a game. And kelku si is literally to do home or to do house. And if you translate it like this, so if you translate the si literally, then you see that it doesn't really make sense to have these as transitive verbs, because you cannot to do a game, I don't know, Minecraft. That doesn't really make sense. So having an indirect object, having a direct object just doesn't really make sense with those. So as always, or as almost always, literal translations will help. Let's finally look at si verbs in combination with ru, which is the actual topic of this video. The child thanks the mother, sa nokur irayo si eveng. So the child does thanks to the mother. Po foru kalt'e si. He greets them, and I will stop now to always give you the literal translation. I think the concept should be clear. If you have questions about the sentence for more detail, you can of course just ask in the description. If you have questions for more details about the sentences, you can of course just ask in the comments. I clean the house. Oe. I clean the house. Laru si oe kelkuru. They make it clear. Tsaru fo lau si. I experience Neytiri. That one is from the second movie, of course, from the song chord. Lie si oe Neytiri. It's hard to not sing that one. I play Elden Ring. Oe uvan alo Elden Ring si. So why did I put in this example? Because it doesn't have ru. Specifically because people often try to do this with ru. So I see a lot of people writing something like Oe uvan si Elden Ringur, or Oe uvan si uvanur alo Elden Ring. So they try to say something like I play the game Elden Ring. But uvansi already means to do a game. So if you say oe uvansi uvanur, that would literally mean I do a game to the game. And it doesn't really make sense. So instead you just change the game part of the see verb. So oe uvan, also Elden Ring see, literally means I do the game named Elden Ring. So instead of trying to smash in an indirect object here, we can just modify the uvan from the uvansi to describe it in more detail and then show what type of game we are playing. Next, let's look at ru in combination with transitive verbs. And now we get a lot of case ending at once, but we will look at the first one in a lot of detail. I give the book to you. Ngaru bukit welting. Now we have 3 nouns or pronouns and 3 different case endings. How do we determine which one gets which? First of all, we have to ask who is the one giving. So who's the subject? I am giving something, so I am the subject. So oe changes to well. Next, what is given? What do I give? The book. The book is being given. So the book is the direct object and gets the T ending. Book becomes bukit. And lastly, to whom is it given? To you. So you are the indirect object and you get the ru ending. So nga changes to ngaru. And this is how we get our full sentence. Ngaru bukit welting. Let's look at some more sentences. They show the way to him. Fol poru went u fjaot. Again, they are the ones showing, so they get the L ending. Fol. Then the way is the thing being shown, so it gets the T ending. Fjaot. Then to him it is shown, so he gets the ru ending. Poru. The man sends a message to me. Upareti fpe weru tutanel. I teach the student the language. Karwele fiati numejuru. This verb actually can be a bit confusing because in English it works a bit weird. I can say I teach the language, but I can also say I teach you. So in English, the student or you and the language can both be a direct object or can look like a direct object. In Latvi, the direct object is always the topic that you are teaching. And the indirect object is always the person to whom you are teaching. So even if I just say I teach the student, then I would say kar oe numejuru. So the numeju, the student, would still receive the ru case ending because they are still the person that receives the teaching. The mother tells the story to you. Ngaru beng vuri tsatnokel. The forest provides everything to us. Vuna rengel fraut aungar. So yeah, as I said in the beginning already, ru marks the receiver of something in these cases. Now we are almost done. I have 2 more topics for you. First of all is the so-called double dative. Some verbs can have 2 times ru. This sounds a bit complicated, but is not that bad. First of all, because there are only 3 verbs that can do this as far as we know. There might be more verbs. There are certainly more verbs where it would make sense to have 2 times ru. But there are only 3 verbs where we right now have official confirmation that we can use 2 times ru in one sentence with. So let's look at these 3 verbs. First of all, Lu, because Lu is Ru's best friend. I have words for everyone. This is a sentence that you probably know from the movie. Jake says that before his big speech. Lueru aleu frapor. Literally, to me, there are words to everybody. Now the question, of course, is how would I say everybody or everyone has words for me? Because free word order, how do we know what happens here? Or I should say flexible word order. And the answer here is simple. Word order does actually matter here, so we can switch it around. Everyone has words for me. Lu frapor aleu. So here, word order does actually matter. Unfortunately, I think we don't have very detailed knowledge how much word order matters. So does it just matter that the frapor is somewhere in front of the veru, or does it have to be specifically this word order? we don't have many examples of this construction, unfortunately. The second verb that can do this is pamìrìk. I write him a message. Oe poru upareru pamìrìk. So what happens here? Pamìrìk is a C verb, to do writing. But now I can do writing to a message, which means I'm just writing the message. So this is just how C verbs usually work. But then I also can write something to someone. So we also have again a receiver. And therefore we now can have 2 times ru with the verb pamìrìk, one for the thing that's being written, one for the one who receives the writing. Now the big question is word order important here? Because we again have 2 times ru. And the answer is no. You can do this sentence in any word order except that the pamìrìk has to stay together. Because there is no danger of actually confusing something here. Because the thing that's being written will always be something that you can write. A book, a message, a poem, something like this, a story. And the receiver will always be a person, or I guess you could also write a message to your plushie, but then again, there is no chance of confusing this with the thing that's being written. Because of this, there is still flexible word order here. And this exact reasoning also applies to the last verb, which is kangàisi, to confirm. Again, we have the thing that's being confirmed and the receiver of the confirmation, so the person to whom something will be confirmed. So for example, she confirms that to us would be po tsar aungaru kangàisi. And again, there cannot be any confusion because one is a person, the other thing is a fact or something that can be confirmed. And now our last part, ru versus ne, and this is again something that I put in here to prevent some mistakes, some often made beginner mistakes. Let's look at a few sentences. Ne means something like towards. It's an adposition, and I know we haven't talked about adpositions yet, but I use them in this slide in a way that it should be easy to understand, and we will talk about them in more detail in the future. I go to school. Ne numtseng oe ke. The dog swims to the island. Nantang tsiep ne spono slele. The jerig runs to the forest. Dul ne nakring jerig. Now the big question is, why do we not use ru here? Because I now spent about half an hour telling you that ru translates to something or someone. So why do I not say numtsengur oe ke? And the difference here is that we are talking about a direction here. We are talking about a movement into a certain direction, while ru is more grammatically the receiver of something. So let's look at it with a slight change. Namely, we can replace the to in all of these sentences with towards. And that is a very good sign that you might have to use ne instead of ru. Because as I said, ne is an adposition and it describes a direction, a movement into a direction. Also, what we'll note here is that we actually have a so-called verb of motion in all of these sentences. So verbs of motions are verbs like to go, to swim, to run, to walk, stuff like that, also to fly, if you're on an ikran, of course. And if you can replace to by towards and you have a verb of motion, then very likely you're talking about a movement into a direction. And that means you will need ne instead of ru. Now, what if you're unsure if a verb uses ru or ne or something else? That is a very valid question, because that can happen a lot. As I said in the beginning, in many cases, Na'vi just use different structures from English, and there's really no shame in simply not knowing what you should use. And in those cases, I can only recommend looking it up. You can look it up in the verb dictionary, which will be linked in the video description. So here you see an entry for smon, which is a verb we had earlier today. And there you see very clearly with color code that we have 2 cases where we have the subject, the red one, which doesn't get any case ending, and we have the orange one, which is the indirect object and which clearly is marked with the ru case ending. The verb dictionary has all the verbs we know, all the Na'vi verbs that are currently known, and all the structures that they are known to be used in. There is of course also the annotated dictionary, And if you look at both entries, you see that the verb dictionary actually copies a lot of the sentences and a lot of the information is simply copied from the entire dictionary. However, the verb dictionary has simplified a lot of things, so the entire dictionary only has official sentences, and for some verbs we only have either no example sentences or we have very complicated example sentences. And in such cases, I, when creating the verb dictionary, simplified things or wrote a very simple example sentence, and the verb dictionary also tries to make the grammar structure that a verb uses more apparent, so with the color coding and stuff like that. But if you're a bit more advanced, then the entire dictionary, of course, is a really good resource. And even if you're a beginner, actually, if you're searching for words that are not verbs, the entire dictionary has all the words and shows official examples for them. The entire dictionary also is included in Reikuniu. So when you look on the website for a word, then you can use the drop-down menu to switch to the entire dictionary. And actually here the screenshot from the entire dictionary is taken from Reikuniu, so I honestly mostly use the entire dictionary through Reikuniu because I'm lazy. That was actually everything I want to say for today, so let's repeat some of the key points. Ru is a case ending like L and T. After a vowel it is just an R, or Ru. After a consonant it is Ur. It is the so-called indirect object, sometimes also called dative, and it often marks a receiver of something. In English, it can almost always be translated as to someone or something. That doesn't work always, and sometimes you get a slightly awkward English sentence, but that can help you to remember when you have to use it. Looking at the literal translation of a verb can help a lot, because often we translate verbs in a way that actually changes their meaning a bit, but we just do that to make the English translations sound nicer and more natural in English. So looking back at what these verbs actually literally mean can help you to figure out what case ending you have to use with them. It is used with all kinds of verbs, especially C verbs use it a lot, but again, Ru doesn't care about transitivity. L and T are the only case endings that care about if a verb is transitive or intransitive. Ru doesn't care at all. You use it when it makes sense, without having to look at if the verb is transitive or intransitive. If you can replace to by towards, often you need the adposition ne instead, especially if you are using a verb of motion, so a verb that describes a movement from one place to another. And lastly, don't hesitate to look up verbs in the entire dictionary or the verb dictionary if you are unsure how to use them. It is really fine to not know something. You are learning a language, so it's actually very natural that you don't know something. And that was it. Do you have questions? Just ask. You can reach me on Discord via email or just write a comment on this video. I'm trying to get better at answering comments on YouTube, although I sometimes forget. If you are here for the entire course, then next there will be Listening 3.1, the vocab video. And if you are just here for the grammar videos, then adjectives will be the next thing for you. Hi, Jadova, ma frapo.